You're watching World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. The meeting of the academicians of the Chinese Academy of Sciences and the Chinese Academy of Engineering is underway in China and is set to wrap up on June the 1st. The meeting is important. At the opening ceremony, Chinese President Xi Jinping has emphasized just how important science and technology is to China's future. He also called on the country to pull out all the stops in pushing innovation and take full charge of core technologies.
Tremendous achievements have been made in the past few years, and more can be expected in the years ahead. Chinese President Xi Jinping said, amid the new science revolution and reshaping of the global landscape, the need for cutting-edge technology has never been as profound today in determining the destiny of a country and the livelihood of its people. He also emphasized the importance of innovation.
The new era of socialism with Chinese characteristics has been clear, and the massive ship of the Chinese nation's rejuvenation is riding the winds and waves. Let us unite closely, enhance our confidence, and overcome difficulties in order to move towards building China into a world leader of science and technology.
China has made many notable achievements in science and technology since its opening up. The country launched Tiangong-2 in 2016. The Space Lab can accommodate the medium-length stay of astronauts and test life support technologies. The country made its first step in sending a human to space in 2003, when astronaut Yang Liwei accomplished the Shenzhou 5 mission. China's homegrown passenger plane, the C919, took off its maiden flight in 2017. The country's latest J-20 stealth fighters were commissioned into Air Force Combat Service in February to better safeguard the nation's sovereignty and national security. In 2017, Chinese manned submersible Jialong descended to 6,699 meters in the Mariana Trench, the world's deepest point. China's first self-developed bullet train, Fuxing, boasts a consistent speed of 350 kilometers per hour. The country has 22,000 kilometers of high-speed railway, which makes up 60% of the world's total. More achievements can be seen in various fields, including quantum communication, radio signal detection, neutrino research, and artificial intelligence. China has the world's largest army of science and technology workers, but it still lacks core innovation capacity. The country is now determined to strengthen its hand in this field, with the aim of creating more opportunities for itself and the rest of the world.
What does it take to become a leading country in technology and innovation in our world today? That is a big question. I'm sure everybody has their answers. Therefore, we invite a panel in Beijing studio. We have Liu Debing, someone who has been involving over the years with China's general technologies. Welcome, sir, to our program. In Los Angeles, we have Jonathan Watzel, the director of McKinsey Global Institute. I hope you'll come in with more analysis coming from different perspectives. And in Washington, D.C., Dr. Ernest McDuffie, founder of the Global McDuffie Group. That's one group that's dealing with online issues. Let me start with Mr. Watzel and also Mr. McDuffie, because I want to somehow have observations coming from the outside. Mr. Watzel, what is your assessment in terms of China's level of science and technological capabilities on the global stage, briefly?
Well, sure, Tian. Thanks for the question. And I think China is fast growing its capacities, but it's still not yet at the level we can say that it's the leader, if you will, in science and technology in most areas. That it's investing a lot, that it certainly has, if you will, the raw talent but it's lacking some critical aspects, notably core technologies, as you mentioned, also talent. I think it's the reality that talent is a global phenomenon, and that China will need to bring in more global talent to China if China is going to have global science and innovation capacity. But you know, it's a fast-moving thing, it's an opportunity, and I think China is improving in many areas. China is already at the cutting edge.
All right. Dr. McDuffie, your assessment coming certainly from the new technologies perspective, from internet-related technologies as well. Mr. McDuffie.
So I would agree. I think China has a lot of potential. They're certainly moving in the right direction. Their speed of increase of capability is impressive. I think that the main factor that's holding China back is a lack of openness. Scientific knowledge, technological advance is a global phenomenon, and to really not so much worry about catching up, but to get ahead, to lead a challenge, to be innovative, you have to embrace knowledge globally. And you have to be able to integrate all of that into your local processes.
So is money the issue, Mr. Liu?
Well, I would not really completely agree to that comments. And of course, you know, for many years, especially after China door opened, gradually, you know, I think invested a lot, achieved a lot, and so achievements we have seen, observed from outside, inside, you know, shows the progress China has ever made in the last 4 decades.
I didn't get your point, sir. You're saying China made a lot of progress. I think that's exactly the other two guests have been talking about.
Yeah.
But they are saying that there are things that China still needs to do. I don't know whether you agree with them about that or not. And my question is China's money going to be an issue, or actually some other factors, as the other panelists had just mentioned, are going to be the issues that we need to handle right now?
Okay, the money issue is always there. You know, without money, without investment, nothing can be generated. But besides of money, I think a lot of other things need to be done as well, like education, like, you know, to exchange of ideas, and like to make a lot of experimental projects, like to really make, you know, put all those theoretical technologies into practice to be connected with China's reality of our economy.
All right. A lot of factors are mentioned by our 3-person panel. Let's take a look, first of all, whether China is lack of money in terms of investment into the new technologies. Chinese investment in high technology are on the rise. Take a look at this. 2017, Chinese government invested about $273 billion on research and development, second only to the United States. Commercially, Chinese venture capitalists invested about $6.8 billion in the high-tech industry, counting for nearly 24% of the total amount of capital in the market. In 2017, China also overtook Japan, becoming the second largest economy on patent application, with a total of nearly 49,000, about 20% of the world's total. So those numbers seeing, as all of you have been suggesting, not lack of money. The money is being put up there. And all of you have been suggesting, China is on the rise when it comes to acquiring more technological and innovation capabilities. But all of you have been talking about different factors, ranging from education to investing and attracting talent, as well as openness, as well as the atmosphere of science and technology, how it's being conducted within the country. But another issue I need to raise here, Mr. McDuffie, is that we don't want to ignore the factors. Since you're coming from outside China, I have to mention this, that the technological imports into China from Western countries have always been difficult. And therefore, how much is that linked to China's way of thinking, building its system to nurture science and technology? How much is that, in a way, preventing China from knowing and practicing the interactions with the rest of the world?
Yeah, clearly that's a factor. The cultural differences between China and other parts of the world have to have an impact. But I think the reality, the global reality, particularly when you look at issues like the global supply chain, when you talk about advances in technology, all those end products end up being created, manufactured in a global sense. Everything, there's pieces of it being made over here, over there. You have to have a standards of manufacturing, standards of quality control to make the global supply chain work effectively. And that's happening and will continue to happen. And so because of that, the kind of 20th century concepts of trade wars and protectionism are rapidly eroding because they're not taking into account the fact that things are manufactured and created in a global supply chain. And so the whole world participates in that activity. So the more cooperation and collaboration globally that you can have, particularly at the education level and the fundamental research level, before you get into the actual competition over products, the better off the whole world becomes, the more stable the world becomes, and the less issues there are.
McDuffie, I would love to agree with you, and indeed I do agree with you, but if you look at whether trade war or not, even though that is not the topic for today because we're talking about science and technological development from China with the world, even though that could play a factor. And if we talk about the basic research, even recently, NASA is having problems. Just one example of having the opportunity to cooperate with China, even though scientists from both sides have been longing for that opportunity for decades, not to mention the other sectors. So those are just some of the very simple examples. But having said that, though, Mr. Waltzel, I'm not here to talk about, well, China is because being boycotted by the others, and therefore China has not developed a system of its own to develop science and technology. But here we need to really take a look at some of the specific questions about education. The Asian system of education is mainly about memorizing, following the teachers. And of course, some argue that is not necessarily in tune with the critical thinking urgently needed when a country system should be about, try to nurture science and technology and innovation. Mr. Waltzel, what do you think?
Well, it's a hotly debated topic in educational circles. I have to say that at the levels that we're talking about in terms of scientific breakthroughs and advances, China's shown that it has obviously got some great scientific genius. I mean, whether we're talking about AI or bio, or, I mean, when I graduated from university in USC about 30 years ago, you could count on the fingers of two hands the number of non-Chinese names in the sciences that were graduating. So we kind of already have known for many years that the next generation of scientific entrepreneurs and engineers will be Chinese. The real question is, where will they be? Will they be in China? Will they be in the U.S.? Will they be somewhere else? Who will they be working for? It's a global war for talent, as Mr. McDuffie says. And I think for China, in a sense, to fight with one hand tied behind its back by only looking at resources from China, in China, is to be at a disadvantage. China has to be open to global talent. And Chinese education, of course, needs to reflect that, too. In the Chinese educational system, we need to see international educators. We need to see international curriculum. We need to see international languages. And so I'm sure that China can do that. It's just a matter of practice, perhaps.
Well, if I could ask Mr. Liu here, I have to beg to differ. Even though, as a host of the debate, I cannot express my opinions much. But if you look at the kinds of projects that China has been having over the past decade about attracting overseas Chinese talent, it is massive. And many of these talents coming back to China, they got a lot of money for research, they got the team, they also got favorable treatment than their local talents being here in China. Some even argue that the problem is not about whether to attract the many overseas talents back to China, but rather how to nurture and further encourage the talents that are already here in China. After all, many of those overseas went overseas from China. So, Mr. Liu, can I put that question to you?
Okay, very good. This is a very good question. And actually, in the last 4 decades, many overseas students, Chinese, went to study in foreign countries. They returned. They returned and they did a lot of good things for this country, economically, technically, and of course, I would say that for those local talents here in China, they were, to a certain extent, they were neglected. They didn't were given equally opportunity and conditions for them to practice their talents in the country or in their institute.
Interesting. So we see one difference in opinion when it comes to what kind of talents to tap in, where emphasis should be. Another thing about the so-called adaptive innovation versus disruptive innovation. Mr. McDuffie, of course, people would love to embrace disruptive innovation. But also people also see, over the past few decades, China's experience and, in a way, achievement of practicing adaptive innovation. So between these two, what is the way out where one has to embrace both of them? Can it be possible at this stage of development for China? Mr. McDuffie, from your perspective.
Yeah, it's certainly possible, and I think you're absolutely correct. You must embrace both of them because you have no control. I mean, both types of innovation will occur, have occurred, will continue to occur, and if you're not able to deal with them, you're going to again be, you know, at a disadvantage. It's certainly more difficult to deal with the disruptive innovations because, as the name implies, it disrupts things. But whenever you have disruption, you also have opportunity for advancements that didn't exist before. Adaptive innovation is the steady state. Is kind of like the safe investment that's going to, you know, pay dividends as it moves forward at a constant rate. And so you certainly have to pay attention to that as well. But you must find a way to do both things at the same time. I believe that China, as the rest of the world, is certainly capable of doing that.
Then, Mr. Waltzel, what does it take to do disruptive innovation? How much is it linked to the research system, to the mainly links between the market, the research, and the government? How is that relationship should be streamed up from your perspective, Mr. Waltzel?
Sure. Well, I think just we have to define our terms a little bit. When we say innovation, we mean a change in a product or a service that creates commercial value. So it's not copying, but it's also not invention. It's doing something that matters in the marketplace, and that takes us a step forward. By that dimension, China's been disrupting things for a very long time, at least in China. I mean, if you, you know, stood on the ground in China over the last 30 years, literally you would have been disrupted from everything from mobility to the workplace to where you buy your food. So China's actually very comfortable with the idea of disruption based on consumer demand, first of all, based on the increasing capabilities of its factories, the infrastructure, and importantly based on its gradual adoption of engineering and supplier networks. But if you take that next step that you're talking about in science-based innovation, then yeah, I think it is a lot about the collaboration between education and research and the marketplace. Importantly, you know, big customers demanding engineering projects. That's pretty critical. Funding, of course, it matters. But most importantly, I'll come back to again is talent. I think without the core scientific talent gathered together in a cluster, which requires quality of life, which requires, as you say, freedom of information and a capacity for discovery, and it importantly requires a mix of talent from all. That's what really brings together the scientific opportunity. And I would note finally that China does have that in many cities of China. In fact, China is one of the most global places for disruptive innovation in the world. If we look at the science parks of Shanghai, Beijing, Shenzhen, these are global environments. And so now China has to harness that to turn it into global innovation.
To turn it into global innovation, Mr. Liu, from China's perspective, if you can, help us to understand what has China realized so far in order to make that happen.
Well, for globalization and go global, that is Chinese aim. And this could result in two fields for China to benefit China's development. One is that going globally and attracting global talents, then improve our internal renovation, to encourage our internal renovation, and also go global, to find resources and cooperate with the international community. That would be really for mutual benefit of all.
Talking about basic research, Mr. McDuffie, it takes a lot of effort and a long time, a lot of patience, a lot of money, quote unquote, wasted. Not necessarily so, in fact, at the end of the day. But it takes a system that is patient with what is happening now and what could happen for tomorrow, Mr. McDuffie.
Yeah, absolutely. The hard problems that the world faces, climate change, space, energy, clean water, food, there's a whole list of very difficult global problems that will require global collaboration, not only of talent and resources, but long-term view. These aren't things that you're going to bring a team together and 6 months from now you're going to have a solution. These are things that are going to take years and decades to deal with. And so that lends itself to this idea of openness, transparency, particularly at the fundamental research and education level, to bring those forces together to really optimize conditions globally for the whole planet. And if we don't do this as a planet, the planet won't survive.
Jonathan Watzel, Ernest McDuffie, Liu De Bing, thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us.